Hello, everybody, and welcome to my presentation on Asian anatomy by Joshua Song, which is me. Due to some scheduling conflicts, I will be presenting alone, so hopefully you guys don't get too sick of me. All right, well, let's get started. So due to religious reasons and superstition, human dissection was rarely done in Asia. This led to, of course, a lot of misconceptions about the human body and the human organ system inside. For example, I'll show you the process necessary to go through a dissection in India, according to the Sushruta Samhita. Also, please forgive my pronunciation if I pronounce anything wrong throughout the entirety of this presentation. So, all right, let's get into it. This following is an excerpt of how to dissect. Therefore, for dissecting purposes, a cadaver should be selected which has all parts of the body present, of a person who had not died due to poisoning but had not suffered from a chronic disease before death and had not attained 100 years of age and from which the fecal contents of the intestines have been removed. Such a cadaver, all whose parts are wrapped by any one of munjab, bark, kusa, and flax, etc., and kept inside a cage, should be put inside a slowly flowing river and allowed to decompose in an unlighted area. After proper decomposition for 7 nights, the cadaver should be removed from the cage and dissected slowly by rubbing it with the brushes made out of Ania rusira, hair, bamboo, or barbaja. In this way, as previously described, skin, etc., and all the internal and external parts with their subdivision should be visually examined. All right, so obviously that is a very lengthy process to go through human dissection. So probably a lot of people didn't do it. In China, it was considered bad luck to do human dissection, but however, a special someone who we're going to cover found a special workaround. Please welcome, everybody, our first anatomy celebrity by the name of Wang Qingren. He lived from 1768 to 1831. He was a physician and he loved to depose the ancient teachings that had been passed down to him. All right, so I'm going to tell you a story about this guy, but viewer discretion is advised as it's a little bit graphic and a little gory. But let's get started. All right, this excerpt is taken from his journal, translated, of course. In 1797, when I was 29 years old, I was passing through the town of Daodi in Luan Prefecture, modern Hebei. At the time, an epidemic was killing 8 or 9 out of every 10 of the children there. The local custom was to bury the dead shallowly so that dogs would eat them. The belief was that this would promote the live birth of the next child. Because of this, every day in each charity graveyard, there would be 100 or so children with their abdomens torn, exposing their entrails. I reflected the reason that ancients had erroneously described the organs was because they had never seen them with their own eyes. So instead of avoiding the pollution, every early morning I would go to a charity graveyard and examine in detail the children with exposed organs. So Mr. Wang actually did discover quite a bit using this method and dispelled a lot of misinformation surrounding the human body. He was the first Chinese physician to discover and describe. Does anybody know what this aorta is right here, underneath the thoracic aorta? And if you guessed right, yes, it's the abdominal aorta. He was the first Chinese physician to describe this. As well, does anybody know what this tube on the left is? Blue tube. You should know because our final week is coming up. It's the vena cava. He was the first one to discover this as well. Also, does anybody know the duct that is currently going into the liver right now? It is the hepatic duct. I realize that the slides come in and fade, so you could probably see the answer, but he discovered the pancreas. And for the final one, does anybody know what this muscle is? Actually, second to last one. Anybody know what this muscle is underneath the lungs? That is the diaphragm. And final one here, does anybody know what the sphincter is? beneath the lower esophageal sphincter. It is, that's right, the pyloric sphincter. So Mr. Wang was the first to record all of 6 of these things, and he developed prescriptions that are still used today, in fact. Up next, we have our wonderful Hua Tuo. He was known as China's first surgeon ever, which he may or may not be, but he was very famous, and he acquired his passion for medicine at the age of 7 upon witnessing the death of his father. All right. After a miscarriage, a woman came to Tuo, complaining of strong abdominal pain. After examining her, Tuo made the bold proclamation that she had yet another baby still inside of her. He pulled out his needles and induced the woman into labor with mere acupuncture. Tuo was right. A second baby slid out, stillborn. So, of course, we don't know how much of these stories, since they're so old, are simple myth, but they're fun to listen to, and they probably have at least a kernel of truth within them. I have another story for you guys from Hua Tuo, legendary physician. All right, so the governor of Guangling, Chen Deng, had an illness which caused him to be distressed by a feeling of stuffiness in his chest. He also had a red face and no desire for food. Hua Tuo took his pulse and said, "Your Honor, there are several pints of parasitic bugs in your stomach, and you are on the verge of developing an ulcer. This was caused by eating raw fish." Whereupon he prepared 2 pints of a decoction for the governor. Hua Tuo had him drink 1 pint first, and then after a little while had him finish the remainder. In the space of time that it takes to eat a meal, the governor vomited up 3 pints or so of parasites. They had red heads and were all wriggling. Half of their bodies looked like raw fish slices. The discomfort that he had experienced was immediately relieved. "This sickness will erupt after 3 years," said Hua Tuo. "If you are attended by a good doctor, he will be able to save you." The sickness did indeed erupt after the specified period, but at the time, Hua Tuo was not in the area, and the governor died, as Hua Tuo had said he would if he did not have a good doctor. Hua Tuo did many other things as he went on. He was the first Chinese surgeon to operate on the abdomen, according to history. He is largely attributed to inventing pulse checking to diagnose his patients. He spearheaded splenectomy, colostomy, spearheaded laparotomy, performed procedures to treat paralysis. He was probably good looking. He did herbal medicine, and maybe he was funny too, and he spearheaded organ transplant. Of course, all these things are used today still, and surgeons nowadays, even today, when if they're a wonderful surgeon, they are referred to as a second Hua Tuo or Hua Tuo reincarnated. Up next, we have the wonderful acupuncture. I barely know her. All right, so this is our last little segment before we end our time today. We're going to go over acupuncture, which is still used today, of course, but has a surprisingly controversial history. So it began as early as 6000 BCE using sharp bones and rocks, mostly for primitive things we imagine, such as like lancing an abscess. But it was first recorded in books a few hundred years before the CE in writing that we have found so far, CE meaning Common Era. In the 15th century Ming Dynasty, we found bronze statues with acupuncture points, these points that are still used today. And during this time, in the 15th century Ming Dynasty, the Great Compendium of Acupuncture and Moxibustion was published, which covered the basics of acupuncture and is also still used today. The book goes on to describe 365 points that can be used to modify qi, which is the original purpose of acupuncture, was to modify qi. So, of course, this is where the controversy begins. So from the 17th century on, the interest in the tradition declined. It was because it was used to modify qi. It was considered irrational and was laced with superstitions. The emperor's decree in 1822 actually excluded acupuncture from the Imperial Medical Institute. However, the rural healers and some scholars held on to the knowledge of the practice. With the rise of Western medicine in the 20th century, acupuncture practices further fell into disrepute. In 1929, it was outlawed in China, along with other forms of traditional medicine, surprisingly. However, within the first half of the 19th century, both America and Britain developed interest in this ancient therapeutic form. It was in 1971 that a member of the US Press Corps was treated with acupuncture during recovery from an emergency appendectomy in China, which he was visiting. He described the experience in the New York Times and created interest in the success of the procedure. Acupuncture was finally accepted in the US when an NIH consensus conference reported that there was positive evidence for its effectiveness, at least in some conditions. So I took the little excerpt from an article I read online that I'll link in my works cited. But yeah, I do think it's interesting how much America has affected medicine in the whole entire world. We hold quite a bit of influence, even amongst China. So I wanted to thank you all for bearing with me through this presentation. I hope you guys found it a little entertaining and learned a thing or two. Obviously, a lot of Chinese anatomy is no longer used today, but I hope you guys got a good story or two, and hope you had fun. Thanks, everyone. Have a great